From Eyewitness News, this is Newsmakers.
It's official. Once the scion of a family that defined New England Republicans, Lincoln Chafee has tacked left, changing his affiliation to the Democratic Party. What it means for the 2014 elections.
I think this turns the Democratic primary upside down.
A political roundtable on the first half of Newsmakers. Then,
swung on, there she goes, deep to...
You can thank booze for saving America's pastime. So claims a new book that investigates how a businessman hoping to sell more beer revitalized baseball in the late 1800s. Our guest on the second half of Newsmakers, author of The Summer of Beer and Whiskey and an editorial page editor for the Providence Journal, Edward Achorn. Good morning. Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. Joining me this week on the Political Roundtable, Eyewitness News analyst Arlene Violet, political reporter for Rhode Island Public Radio Ian Donis, as well as Eyewitness News political analyst Joe Fleming. And joining us this week is editorial page editor Edward Achorn. Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Good morning.
And first, Ed, a big congratulations to you. It was announced this morning that Ed is vice president and the editorial pages editor at the Providence Journal. So congratulations.
Thank you, Tim.
It's big news.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, let's quickly go around the table. Obviously, top of mind is Lincoln Chafee announcing that he's joining the Democratic Party this week. Arlene, and all the way around, does Governor Chafee becoming a Democrat help or hurt his re-election chances?
Helps.
Help.
I look at it like the old Janis Joplin song, freedom is another word for nothing left to lose. Chafee was a man without party support. Now he has potential Democratic support, including from the leader of the free world, so I think it helps him.
In a debate, I would have crucified you. Help or hurt, Ian? Help or hurt?
Help.
Joe?
I think it helps slightly.
Help.
Marginally helps.
Marginally helps. All right, Joe, I'm a little surprised from you. Earlier this week, I talked to you, and you said you were surprised because he needed a PAC ticket.
I still believe he needs a PAC ticket. I think it helps slightly due to the fact that I have to believe they've done polling, and they've realized that he cannot win as an independent. So his only path to victory will be to get a base of support in a Democratic primary. That's the reason why I say it may help him slightly. The other thing is, I have to assume he's getting Barack Obama's support now as a Democrat. And that's another thing that should help him in a very Democratic state. If the President of the United States is supporting you, that should help him in a Democratic primary.
Ian, someone who disagrees with you is Jennifer Duffy, or at least through a tweet in 140 characters. She's an analyst for Cook Political Report. She tweeted, Chafee's switch to the Democratic Party does nothing to improve his chances of a second term.
Yeah, I spoke with Jennifer this week, and she says she still considers Chafee one of the three most vulnerable incumbent governors in the country. She thinks he would do better in a large general election field where he wouldn't have faced a primary as an independent. And let's remember, his approval rating, the most recent Brown poll, was only 25.5%. That's compared with about 57% for State Treasurer Gina Raimondo, about 64% for Providence Mayor Angel Taveras. So skeptics might question how Chafee really boosts his approval rating, even as a Democrat.
It's all about raising money, however. Part of the problem is...
He doesn't have that problem.
Well, as an independent, obviously, I think he's run out of donors in a way, and at least this makes him able to tap into the Democratic Party machine, because theoretically now he's a sitting Democrat incumbent.
He just has to tap into his bank account.
Well, he has to watch out for, obviously there's tons of rules of what you can spend on yourself. He can loan himself money, etc. But he's cheap. I don't think he wants to tap his money. We know that from the haircut debate. He still gives the same tip to his barber. Come on.
The other thing, Tim, to consider is simply Chafee's base of support is Democratic voters. The poll we did for WPRI-TV in September of 2012, he had a 29% favorable job rating. However, among Democrats, 43% favorable job rating. Yeah. Among Republicans, 12%. Independents, 22%. So his only base of support right now is Democratic voters. And I think that's what they're trying to do. They want to capitalize on that base and propel it into a general election.
Yeah, but compare that with Raimondo and Taveras. They're much higher.
Absolutely.
And this is a desperation move, I think. I've seen some internal polls that show him in a lot of trouble. And I think this was the only way he had to try to squeeze out a victory.
So, Ed, you mentioned Raimondo and Taveras. Of course, we should point out no one has announced a run for governor except for moderate party candidate Ken Block. We should also note we're 16 months out from the election, but we have big news this week, which is why we're talking about it. Let's say Angel Taveras, mayor of Providence, General Treasurer Gina Raimondo,
decide to make a run for governor as Democrats. Who has the edge here with Lincoln Chafee in the race, do you think?
Well, it's hard to say, but Taveras, I think, is underrated. He's a rock star with the Latino community. He's going to bring out tons of votes in a Democratic primary. Gina Raimondo obviously has to bring out a lot of the independents. But there is a mood in this state, ABC, anybody but Chafee, and people are craving leadership. They're looking for somebody who can move the state in a better direction.
I think Ed is spot on. The conventional wisdom among some pundits this week seemed to be that Chafee's move helped Raimondo, but I think people who underestimate Taveras do so at their own peril. I think he's got a lot of talented field people who can get the vote out in the cities, and if he can get the vote in the 5 or 6 largest cities in Rhode Island, that could really put him over the top in a primary potentially.
That's true. However, keep in mind, Angel's votes and Chafee's votes are basically the same voters. So while Angel will get these votes, he will lose some votes that will go to the governor due to the fact the progressives, some of the union people will go that way. Gina's votes are the independent Democrats, the conservative Democrats. Her big challenge will be, can she get them out in a primary, like Bruce Sunland did when he ran against Flaherty and Paolino. That costs a lot of money to increase the primary turnout. This helps her because she has to get less votes now because Chafee's siphoning off votes from Angel. While he'll still have great strength in Providence, Pawtucket, Woonsocket areas where he should do very well, it's going to be tougher for him at this point.
However, if one of them drops out of the primary, let's suppose Taveras decides to stay, I think she's going to have a very, very tough time against either Chafee and or Taveras. I think she ought to start thinking about running as an independent. I know you and I disagree on that, but I think people, first of all, Democrats will vote for an independent because they don't have the R attached to their name, and I think she has an incredible opportunity really to put together a female vote if she runs her campaign correctly.
Right, but keep in mind there's going to be a fairly strong Republican candidate running for governor this year, it looks like. It looks like Mayor Funk from Cranston is going to run. He has a base of support that John Robitaille didn't have 3 years ago. So that's going to help Mayor Fung a little bit more. He's from Cranston. The Democrats didn't even run a candidate against him in 2012. He borders Warwick, where Chafee won by only 2,000 votes in 2010. So I would assume Fung will do very well in the city of Warwick also.
The mayor's untested, and he's been in office.
You mean Alan Fung?
Alan Fung.
Yes.
He's been untested. He hasn't had to be in debates. He's not exactly the most fluent speaker, so he's not necessarily going to be capturing those particular votes. Independents really look at, of the Republican and the independent, who most do I want? And if he stumbles just a little bit, you're going to see a defection.
But at the same time, it's easy to forget that John Robitaille came very close to beating Lincoln Chafee in 2010. Robitaille got about better than 33% of the vote, and I think you have to figure Alan Fung starts about there and can improve on that.
Well, Fung would love to run against Chafee. That would be his best shot. I think if he ran against Raimondo, it would be lights out. So we'll see what happens.
Raimondo the victor in that candidate. Well, the other, I mean, Alan Fung, he has Cranston behind him. As you point out, he didn't put anyone up. The Democrats didn't put anyone up against him in 2012, and I agree he hasn't been tested. But just in that block of voters in Cranston must help him tremendously.
It will help him greatly. And as I said, he'll probably spread out to Warwick and pick up support there. So I think Alan Fung will be a very credible candidate no matter who the Democrats have. If Lincoln Chafee is a Democratic candidate, obviously Fung will be thrilled. And remember, Ken Block in a three-way race is probably going to draw more votes than he did last time.
I kind of feel like the ads write themselves with Lincoln Chafee joining the Democratic Party. Couldn't this political flip-flopping hurt him come election time? It feeds into that quirkiness image in a way, do you think?
I think people are probably pretty firm already in their views of Chafee. So if people already don't like Chafee, they still don't like him. But if people are willing to consider him, becoming a Democrat doesn't hurt them. But yes, you can see the commercial about him being a political chameleon.
You mentioned about Fung, though, reaching into Warwick. Part of the problem, of course, Scott Avedisian, who's a fellow Republican. What's he going to do for Fung as opposed to his pal Chafee? I think he's going to sit on his hands.
But 3 years ago, what happened? Robitaille only lost Warwick by 2,000 votes to Lincoln Chafee.
Yeah, but no thanks to any activity on Avedisian. Avedisian took a back. Sat back at that time. I don't think he sits back this time. I think he actively assists Chafee this time.
Really?
Absolutely.
He'll assist a Democrat.
Yes, he will.
Well, that brings up the whole conundrum of What do the Democrats do in general? I mean, does anyone have a thought about what's going on behind the scenes right now in the Democratic Party, and who would ever want to be the chairman of the state party right now? Honestly, isn't it a hot mess going on? Any thoughts on this?
I think the Democrats are going to sit back right now. I don't think you're going to see any of the Democrats come out and support one of the three potential Democratic candidates for governor. They're going to wait till next January, February, March, and make their decisions then when the field plays out a little bit better. There's no guarantee.
The pressure's on House Speaker Gordon Fox, isn't it, Ian?
Yes, it is, Tim. And it was already difficult for him to choose the next Democratic chairman, a successor to Ed Pacheco, because he wouldn't want to show a bias toward Gina Raimondo or Angel Tavares. Fox, we know, is close to Tavares. And now it's only more complicated with Lincoln Chafee in the mix as a Democrat as well.
What does Ken Block do to the 2014 makeup?
He has a minimal impact. I think with Chafee as a Democrat, he has less of an impact than he would otherwise.
Do you think he can still, under this makeup, reach the 5% that he needs to keep his party alive? I mean, he's got good name recognition at this point.
I think Block will do better than he did in 2010. I think he'll hit double digits in a three-way race. And those are voters that would not be Lincoln Chafee's votes. So those are votes he's taken away from Lincoln Chafee.
Ken always bristles at when people say to him, you're the reason John Robitaille didn't win. Do you think he is the reason that John Robitaille is? Why?
I don't think he is, because I think he appeals to the middle ground, moderate party. John Robitaille had, in some people's views, extremely conservative positions. I think he lost votes because of that. They gravitated, no doubt, to Ken Block because they didn't want to go with the Democrats, but it's not his votes. People did not like how ultra-conservative it was.
Come on, Arlene. Robitaille lost by less than 3% to Chafee in 2010. Wouldn't some of those voters normally have gone to Robitaille?
I'm not sure. I really don't, because I know a lot of people were very negative toward him on his issues of fiscal policy. The gay issue was very important. He had turned off people on that, the so-called log cabin Republicans, etc. So those little votes, where you lose them, it's on those kinds of issues.
But John Robitaille only came close because Frank Caprio self-destructed. It wasn't that John Robitaille was running the greatest campaign in the world to win. Frank Caprio was starting to self-destruct, and everyone felt Chafee had 36-37% of the vote. His number really never moved in the whole campaign. The whole Chafee strategy had to be keep Robitaille and Caprio splitting the rest of the vote.
Arlene, going back to your theory on Gina Raimondo running as an independent, and we should point out Ian had asked her about that, and
she wouldn't rule out.
But I mean, she's obviously a fundraising machine. But as we've seen evidence with Lincoln Chafee, doesn't that really hurt her raising money if she were to be unaffiliated like that?
First of all, it would be a timing issue for her to make that decision. So her campaign would tell her to continue to raise all those funds up till next May. Okay, but by that point, she'll have $2.5 million. She then, I'm sure, can come up with a plausible reason as to why she would run as an independent. But frankly, I think she's in trouble staying in a race with Chafee or Tavares and herself because of the union backlash that blame her for the pension reform.
But a three-way race, you feel she'll be okay?
I think, yes. She still has the get out the vote problem, but she has a much better chance.
So
in the three-way.
With your theory, I agree with you. She'll wait to the last minute to see what the primary is going to look like before she makes any type of decision.
Union backlash. Unions play a big part, especially, it seems to me, in primaries. They can really flex their muscle. Are the unions waiting and watching to see what Governor Chafee does with the GIST contract? Education Commissioner Deborah Gist, she's asked for a 3-year contract. All signs are that she's going to be renewed, but isn't the question how long, and doesn't that send a signal to the unions?
Oh yeah, that's the question, how long, and if it's a short term, she's sort of a
lame duck kind of thing.
Lame duck. She can't do much.
And can Chafee win back the unions? I mean, he's angered them already a little bit.
To go back to your question a bit earlier, I mean, the unions are in a great position because they have leverage. They were a vital source of support for Chafee and his victory in 2010, and now they can kind of be courted by the different candidates. It's hard to imagine them going with Raimondo, but they can play themselves off between Tavares and Chafee, and they could be a potentially very powerful force in this primary.
All right, we have about 1 minute left. It was brought up in the beginning of the discussion. You touched on it. Lincoln Chafee's BFF in Washington, D.C., the President of the United States. What is Barack Obama's impact on this race. I had a little back and forth with Ted. I wasn't so sure with Ted Nesi, who's off this week. I wasn't so sure that the president would be out on the ground actively campaigning for Lincoln Chafee before the primary, that he would mess up whatever the Democratic Governors Association wanted to do there. Do you think that's going to happen? Are we going to see the president here endorsing someone before the primary?
I think we will. I mean, keep in mind, Lincoln Chafee is now the incumbent sitting Democratic governor in the state of Rhode Island. Why wouldn't the president support the incumbent Democratic governor?
So what impact does it have?
I think it could have a number of impact behind the scenes, especially if the president tries to do things to help Lincoln Chafee position himself better for a Democratic primary. I think the president coming will have an impact. Will it be enough to put Lincoln Chafee over the top? Probably not. It'll help him raise money, no question about that. But if Barack Obama sent some of his troops to Rhode Island to help Lincoln Chafee, to help establish a ground game, which I don't believe Lincoln Chafee has right now, that would help him greatly in a Democratic primary.
But President Obama better stop having more wheels fall off.
Yeah, he needs to remain scandal-free.
I agree with Joe's analysis, but I think it obviously helps Chafee a lot less than during a presidential election year.
Right.
Where he's at the top of the ticket and everything like that. All right, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to go from politics to baseball. The book is The Summer of Beer and Whiskey, written by this guy. Stick around. You're watching Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. To my right, Ian Donis from Rhode Island Public Radio and Eyewitness News analyst Arlene Violet. Our guest this week is Edward Achorn. He is the editor for the editorial pages at the Providence Journal, and he's also the author of a new book, The Summer of Beer and Whiskey. Ed, congratulations on this book.
Thank you, Tim.
A lot of fun. Who is Chris Vonderay?
Well, I argue in the book that this guy, a German immigrant who came to America with nothing, knew almost nothing about baseball, essentially saved the game by making it available to immigrants for a cheap price, 25 cents instead of 50 cents.
50 cents.
Boy,
inflation, huh?
Yeah, inflation, can you imagine? And also having beer at the ballpark and Sunday baseball.
Now, Vonderay, who is on the screen right now, that was his job. He was a beer salesman, wasn't he? He had a beer garden?
He had a grocery, he had a beer garden, and he had a saloon out in back of his grocery. And he noticed this strange American game going on down the street, and he thought, and all sorts of American-born people couldn't make a go of it. He thought, I can do this, and he invested $1,800, his life savings, sort of rebuilt the ballpark and founded the franchise that is now the St. Louis Cardinals.
So your hypothesis in the book is he sort of saved baseball, made it more accessible, and so it could grow. But you get the impression that this guy just had a massive personality, and he liked women a lot.
Oh, a tremendous ego, and he essentially his love of young women ruined his life. He was married 3 times, went through very terrible divorces where he lost a lot of his property and so forth. And
didn't he get caught at the ballpark with a girlfriend?
Yes. I write in the book about how his wife was sitting out on the steps one night at their house in St. Louis, and he came roaring around the corner in a carriage, and the thing tipped over, and his girlfriend fell out of the carriage and so forth. And then she showed up at the ballpark a month later, the girlfriend, and Vonderay's wife came over and clubbed her on the head with a soda bottle.
Man.
So.
To bring things into the present, Ed, we know that baseball remains very popular, although it's been supplanted by football as the most popular sport. If we made you commissioner of baseball, what would you do to try and rejuvenate the game?
Well, I would learn a lot from the 1880s. Baseball was known in that period as the American game because it was filled with action and fast moving, if you can imagine that.
Fast moving. The games now are almost 4 hours.
That's right. The games were like an hour and a half. And they didn't have the batters stepping out after every pitch. They didn't have the pitchers wasting all this time. They just played the game. And I think if baseball would do this, it would be tremendous.
Should we also go back to no gloves in a pitcher's box?
No, yeah. Back then they played without gloves, and that was rather dangerous. So I wouldn't go back there. But you know.
What was the most? Go ahead, Arlen.
Well, I love in the book you have the owner going in to the locker room saying, "Why did you drop that ball?" And I thought to myself, how ironic in a way in your column. That's what you ask politicians every week. But seriously, you said baseball, and the thesis, one of the theses in this book, is that it really does mirror the culture. And let's talk a little bit just on the corruption issue. Your book really talks about a lot of corruption in the game back then, other than steroids potentially, which is a cheat. Do you see the same thing happening in baseball today?
Well, yeah, the steroids thing is terrible. It's really done horrific damage to baseball. Back then, it was even worse. I mean, the baseball was considered totally corrupt in the 1870s. The games were being thrown. There was the National League pennant was thrown in 1877. It was as big a scandal as the 1919 World Series. And people stopped going to games. They couldn't trust it anymore. And that's why baseball has to be very, very tough about gambling to this day.
No asterisk next to their name in the Hall of Fame, in your view?
Well, they don't. Someone who throws a game to gamblers doesn't belong in the Hall of Fame, you know. So
Pete Rose is out, and what about Barry Bonds, Sammy Sosa? What would you do, Commissioner?
I feel the same way. To me, the steroids use really, I mean, it damaged the numbers of the game, which is part of the beauty of the game, are these numbers. And it just ruined it. I still consider Hank Aaron the home run champion.
As a Red Sox fan, how do you reflect on the differences in ownership between the current ownership, which has delivered 2 World Series championships, but also been very hubristic, arrogant at times, versus the old ownership that didn't keep up Fenway Park, but a working family could afford to go to a ball game?
It's a different game now, different economics, and I think it's a shame that it costs so much. I mean, I love the Paw Sox. I'll throw in an ad for them. It's a great place to go see baseball,
really
and bring the family, and it's just wonderful.
And that's Ian always gives me grief because I used to be a big baseball fan, but I've had sort of a falling out with Major League Baseball, and one of the things is it's just affordability, the level of access, and I'm a Red Sox fan. I can't afford, honestly, take my family to Fenway Park. It's going to be hundreds and hundreds of dollars at this point. Is it too late? I mean, you know what it is? It reminds me of what the National League was in your book, which is a snobby league. You know, they wouldn't play on Sundays, and that was the big sort of draw, was that this league you could play on Sundays and drink on Sundays. Is that what Major League Baseball is now, your version of the National League in this book? Or the version, I should say.
Yeah, I would think so. It's priced its way out for the middle class and lower middle class, but you know, baseball's so wonderful. You have different ways to enjoy it. You got the minor leagues, and I still think that's a wonderful thing. And it's a shame that you know, I feel the same way. I can't take my family up to Fenway Park.
Right.
Really, I mean, I could, but it's a huge
you
cost.
have to liquidate a bond or something to go for you to Fenway Park.
One thing I love in the summer of beer and whiskey is your focus on the 2 black players,
That's right.
Fleet Walker and his brother, and the type of discrimination. I mean, most people think all of that started with Jackie Robinson.
That's right. The movie just came out, 42, about Jackie Robinson. But actually, the first black major leaguer recognized was Moses Fleetwood Walker in this league, the Beer and Whiskey League, the American Association. And if you can imagine the prejudice he went through, he was much like Jackie. He was college educated. He had a very strong character, very strong personality. He was able to put up with a lot of abuse, which was very important. So I devote a chapter to him. I think, you know, it's interesting. We think black baseball is a recent development, but it's not. There were not major league, but there were professional black baseball teams playing each other, traveling between cities in the 1880s. And that's a story I enjoyed telling in the book.
What was worse at this time of baseball in the late 1800s, being an umpire or being a catcher?
That's a great
and explain my question.
It's a great question, because catchers, these people played baseball barehanded. Catchers just had some covering on their palms, but they had their fingers exposed. And if you can imagine the foul tips, the damage this did to their hands, they're just excruciating descriptions of games in that period. And the umpires, the owners were so cheap, they only staffed 1 umpire per game. And the fans were brutal to them. The phrase "kill the umpire" wasn't just a line in the 1880s. They would pour out of the stands sometimes, and the players had to surround them with their bats and protect them. But having 1 umpire let the players get away with all sorts of nonsense, like if the ball was hit to right field and the umpire was following that, the runner might go from second straight home without touching third.
What was the most surprising thing you learned in the course of researching your book?
You know, the surprising thing I learned is that baseball is baseball. Even back then, played with different rules, played barehanded, it still plays a lot like the modern game. The professionals are really into the craft. They know how to hit. The pitchers know how to mix up pitches. The fielders back up each other. And the fans are just like they are today. They're whistling the Dead March when their team they hate is losing, and it's just great. And baseball just goes all the way back, and it's just as wonderful then as it is now. And so
we have less than a minute left. I'm curious, Ian, I want to ask you too, but been some calls for possibly computerizing the calls for balls and strikes, because the thought is you can't, yes or no, should that happen, computerizing?
No, I like the human element.
Yeah.
I feel the same way.
Two old-time baseball hearts right here. Well, the book is called The Summer of Beer and Whiskey, written by Ed Achorn. If you're looking for a good gift for Father's Day, this would be it. Ed, thank you very much for joining us. And joining us also, Arlene Violet and Ian Donis. I'm Tim White. We will see you next week on Newsmakers.
That was a strikeout idea.
Or a big hit.